Okay, cool. My name is Michelle Lai, and today we're going to talk about privacy infrastructure versus end-user applications. Let me start with a story before we do self-intros. So in 1969, we sent people to the moon with a computer with a lot less computing power than the dumbest smartphones we have today. How did that happen? How did we get from there to now? So one answer is we had a lot of crazy nerds who really enjoy solving intellectual problems. The other answer is people want to get rich. There's a chapter titled I Want to Get Rich in Chris Miller's Chip War. And I think that explains where we are today, which is that infrastructure has been, in recent history, been the focus of venture capitalists and shitcoin speculators. And so that's why we have infrastructure fatigue today. But now the tide is turning. We're starting to hunt down applications. And so that's what we want to talk about today, how we're making that switch. If I can ask each of you to introduce yourselves.
Yeah, I'll kick it off. My name is Nathan Ginnever. I am an applied cryptographer that's been working with Ethereum, IPFS distributed networks for about 10 years now. I'm working on a protocol called Enclave, and it's a multi-party compute network to facilitate FHE and to help democratize the computation portions of the encryption for FHE.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kai. I've been a supporter of crypto, decentralized private tech for a while. I've contributed to a number of projects, most recently, and for the last few years, Railgun, which is a private transaction system for Ethereum.
Nice. Hi, I'm Garrett, and yeah, I've been working in decentralized infrastructure, starting with making custom circuit boards for FPGA Bitcoin mining, and ever since then been involved in infrastructure, a lot on hardware. So I believe that decentralized infra is the best way to increase the default level of freedom for people, and that's what I care about doing the most. And yeah, now I work on a fund called Permanent Ventures, where we're investing just in decentralized infrastructure in general, like in and out of blockchain. So yeah. Thanks.
Hey everyone, I'm Aidan from Chainsafe, and at Chainsafe we build blockchains specifically for the Ethereum, Filecoin, and Polkadot communities, and then we build other frameworks to help people interact with those blockchains in different native programming languages. And recently we've built out Sprinter, which gives developers access to unifying the chain abstraction world, and so you don't have to be worried about specific formats, token formats, or specific wallets, but rather providing your users with the best and cheapest routes possible, regardless of where those assets or that state lies in the Web3 space, with the hope to give people the opportunity to build out their dream applications without having to worry about the complexities that go into doing that, building their dreams.
Hey, I'm Dab Lion. I'm your friendly Ethereum core developer, focusing on consensus. Now I'm Sigma Prime. Used to be at Lodestar with this lovely guy. And yeah, focusing on executing the Ethereum roadmap, currently focusing on sharding and PRDAS.
Awesome, great lineup. I have a question that may be obvious, but I'd love to get your answer. And so the question is, are infrastructure people good at end-user apps? And how do we get better? All my questions are open, so pick up the mic if you want to.
I think that's changing, and these guys are a great example of that at Chainsafe, for example. But in general, no, right?
I think if we're talking about how the user interacts with our protocols, maybe not so much.
I mean, I think in the majority of tooling around infrastructure, right? You can give infrastructure people nice dashboards and all to coordinate and set up the whatever they need to do. And everyone keeps yelling, no, give me my YAML playbook or something. So clearly, I think we can see where the preference is. So in general, I think maybe no, but I hope to be proven wrong.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's kind of irrelevant.
Can you talk into the mic?
Yeah, sure. At the end of the day, I think it's irrelevant. Infrastructure people are going to be building infrastructure. The problem is, I think that there just aren't really application developers because we're missing so many kind of primitive components. And so, we have these cycles where everyone builds the same thing rather than kind of people building things that work together. And I think that's why, for example, DeFi has been so sticky, is because there's an ecosystem of tools that then allows for people to aggregate those things into some really interesting new things. But that hasn't really happened for consumer applications or anything like that. And we're seeing that with chain abstraction right now, where the point of this was to end the fragmentation, but we're just refragmenting within a different banner, this time chain abstraction. And so I think as long as we do that, this is just going to persist. But whether or not we're good at applications is, I think, not necessarily the kind of, it's more to the greed piece that you talked about earlier, right? Where everyone just sees the money there right now, and so that's what they're focused on.
Right. Okay, so I think the short answer is they're not, but they're improving, and part of that is because the money is moving towards application, which I think is a great thing. Okay, next question. At what point, if I don't know if any of these specifically applies to your protocol. I know it does to Zcash, where we were forced by the market to transition from a heavy infrastructure platform to more user-friendly applications. We shipped snarks, we made it performant, and then we shipped trustless setups. Sometime about a year ago, we started refocusing on making ourselves a lot more user-friendly. We were quite challenging from that perspective before. And part of that is because we're token funded, which meant that at a certain level, a certain price level, we're in jeopardy. So we were forced by the market. So I wanted to know if any of you have experiences where there was a strategic shift, and if so, what was that like?
Yeah, from our work in the Zcash community, we wanted to build something that would target end users, specifically within the wallet space. And then when we went to do it, we couldn't because there was missing infrastructure. And so we built something called WebZ.js recently. And I think that kind of speaks to the situation in a lot of these maybe more esoteric kind of ecosystems where we want to believe that everything is there, but everything is not there, especially when you go to actually build something. And so I think we still need to fund and focus a lot on some of these things, and then also just making them more accessible, right? If I need to learn a new API every time I want to do basically the same thing, the average web developer is just not going to do that. They're going to do whatever is easiest for them, which totally makes sense for them and their family, most likely. And so I think we're almost there, but we need to really work with people to see how they build and what they're building and make sure that we're doing things for them and not necessarily for what we feel as infrastructure developers is the right thing to do. Because I think we get lost in the sauce a lot.
Got it.
So Ethereum, interestingly, is going the reverse way as you. It's transitioning from a user chain to a rollup chain.
Sorry,
And
who is?
Ethereum L1. It's now, like with the rollup-centric roadmap, you would say that the chain is even less usable because you have all this fragmentation, and we are taking this trade-off for scalability.
I see. So Ethereum first started as a product, an application, and then now more of an infrastructure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so at Enclave, we're a newer protocol, so we've kind of come into this with the understanding that having a user base is important. So it's been quite the struggle. We spend a lot of our time thinking about how we can take these pieces, these building blocks of cryptography, and find just enough to piece them together to where it works in like the most duct taped together way possible. And so that we're pumping out an application that at the end of the day would feel more like Ethereum on its launch, where you download the wallet and you hit a few buttons, do a little tutorial, and hopefully you're running on a nice, secure, private network.
Right, so like almost like an MVP kind of application on top of the infrastructure.
Correct, yeah, we're targeting voting, and the protocol and the underlying cryptography is a large motivator for why we've chosen that specific application, because it's an easier one to pull off.
Got it. Great.
Yeah, well, I think, even if you're just a pure infrastructure play, like at some point, someone's gonna have to use it in order for there to be any activity or for they to be used, right? And I think time and time again, with new technology and all, you kind of have this point where, like, all right, cool, we'll have this amazing launch, whatever, like it's ready to be used, whatever, and then people actually start using it, and then you realize, oh wait, all of these assumptions that we made about how it would be used, we got to throw them out the window because, like, people go in and do things differently. Like, the iPhone 4, right, had the little antenna in the place where you hold the thumb, where you put your thumb usually, and it would just drop calls and all, right? And you can find the same thing in crypto applications. So I think at the very least, even if the UX sucks initially, you need to have something out there in order to inform your architectural decisions and where you're actually putting productive hours. Otherwise, you're quite possibly just building the wrong thing.
I think that's a good reflection. Figuring out what to build is a very organic, natural thing, and you don't have to, having a whole idea in your head about what it's going to be at the very beginning and sticking to that is not the best way to go. I think it's just like what you said, building a little more selflessly, kind of. It's nice thinking about the others. As infrastructure builders, it's what we should all be doing, right? Thinking about the needs rather than the technical vision of what we want to accomplish.
But it's so fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that is understanding when you're building an open source, and that's what we all should be thinking when we're building, right? That we're a part of the peer-to-peer open source community first and foremost, right? Web3 should be an afterthought, really. And when you're doing that, you really need to take into consideration intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. And if you're not considering both the kind of open nature of it while considering how you're going to monetize and sustain yourself, which also needs to be front of mind, you're definitely not going to be a part of the long-term kind of zeitgeist, right? You're just going to be building for whatever hype cycle, and we've seen it. Some of the best and brightest, raising all the money in the world, don't make it. And obviously we can do a lot better than that.
Yep. Okay, I wanted to move on to a philosophical question. So the question is, do we want invisible infrastructure or conspicuous infrastructure? And taking us back to the 1990s, Intel started this relatively genius campaign where it was the moment where PC manufacturers were starting to compete ferociously. And Intel said they're not a PC manufacturer, but they supply the chips. And so without that direct connection to consumers, they ran a campaign where they highlighted how important it was as a consumer that you want an Intel chip inside your PC, which is why we get Intel Inside stickers on some of our PCs. I don't know if they still do it. It's been a while. And that generates demand even if they don't have the direct connection at the point of sale. So as infrastructure providers, do you want users to know that you're underneath the stack? Or should we aspire towards a world where they only need to choose the application, the front end, and you make everything work seamlessly behind?
I want to say invisible, but it's incredibly frustrating that you see rollups offering extremely secure solutions with all the guardrails, and then some random project comes, deploys a multi-sig with no guarantee whatsoever, and just captures all the users in a terribly insecure fashion. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say it's actually incredibly important, I think, that the users know that we built something under the stack that they can trust. The security is very important in the space. And it's important to know that it's not just the developers that we're building with the right intentions, but the research was done in an open manner, and everything has been peer reviewed. And then you get that stamp of approval because you're trusting a lot of things
Right.
with these networks.
I'd like to hear from Garrett as the only one, the only VC on the panel. I think he's not necessarily married to infrastructure or applications.
Yeah, but so I've always also just wanted to say it should be invisible. People don't care, whatever. But when you brought up the Intel Inside example, like they turned this whole idea of like the infrastructure inside of a machine into a meme, and that caught on, and then everybody wanted it. And I think we should leverage the same mimetics that are like native to us as humans. Like we should like latch on to like say like, oh, like, you know, ZK inside or whatever it is, right? Like I think that would be huge if we could bring that into like the broader collective consciousness where people demand certain like cryptographic assurances that like their privacy is, you know, considered at least. Like.
Yeah, I think the point to highlight though is, I mean, infrastructure doesn't necessarily need to be hidden. It can be quite visible, but it needs to be visible in the context of like what properties am I getting out of this, right? So I guess, you know, taking the Intel Inside example, I see the Intel Inside sticker, and the properties that I've been led to believe is this is going to be reliable. It's, you know, a standardized instruction set at the time, at least, so it's going to be compatible with all of these different programs that are compiled. You know, presumably high performance, right? Like I'm interested in those properties when I see that sticker. I'm not interested in the fact that it has a fancy glowy eye on the like a little hologram sticker on it, right? You know, and it's like ZK. Okay, well I slapped ZK on it. I'm not interested in like ZK for ZK. I'm interested in it because, oh, it's either going to give me some privacy like benefits or it's going to give me some scalability. So I think infrastructure, it's good for the infrastructure to be visible, right? It's needed for there to be like trust, but it needs to be in the context of what properties am I getting as a user.
So, you know, I love the emotions about these things, but there's, you know, some tangible ways we can do this as a community, but I think people aren't prepared to hear it. So the way that open source started was with the copyleft movement. And so something like GPL, which was introduced by Richard Stallman, the whole intent and purpose was to ensure that not us as developers or people developing things would have access to free code, but rather end users would be protected from things they can't understand. And so we can actualize these feelings by deciding that we as a community actually care about things like GPL, but we do not. And so there is ways we can do this, and it's not through imposing our opinion, it's not through imposing our beliefs, but it's through actually leveraging licenses, the original open source license, to make sure that people cannot literally do the things we don't want as a community with this. And so if we actually stand for the things we believe in, we need to come together and ensure that there is actual protections that come into these things. And it's not just, wow, I wish people would do better things with the things I'm building. And so, you know, I believe that we just need to go back to our roots, and, you know, the cypherpunk movement and all of this, actually, a lot of it is built upon a lot of this kind of copyleft primitive-based thinking.
I think on a related note, if I can contribute, and also related to what Lion said, it's almost like you have a very secure layer, and then you have some random application with 2 out of 3 multi-sig. It's almost like Intel Inside and spyware in the middle. But I, as a consumer, I don't really care what's inside. I want the whole stack to deliver the promise that I'm being told when I buy a thing, when I use a thing. So I wish, I hope that there can be some sort of a collaborative messaging or kind of association that can help me.
Yeah, we need like a third party like L2Bit.
Perhaps, yeah. Yeah, a neutral third party. Tell me if it's really doing what it promises to do.
Yeah, which L2Bit I think has been extremely successful at the mission of helping users understand the trade-off of rollups and basically call out the people that just deploy a multisig and pretend to be a rollup. And they have done an excellent job of communicating a very complex trade-off space into these little squares, like the pizza. So having something for applications would actually be quite cool.
Awesome.
And hope that they don't get captured.
Okay, final question if we have time. everyone is competing for app devs now. How do you think you can compete?
Just work on Ethereum and you don't care because everyone is there already.
Yeah, I don't really see a lot of, I don't think of it as competing so much right now. I think that more so we need to find more collaboration to get what we all want together to be out. I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, a lot of kind of people working on the same things and not coordinating to get certain components better, faster, stronger. And so I don't really look for competition so much in the app space as looking at another app developer and saying, hey, how can we work together?
I think my answer to that question is get sick of competing and just become the app dev yourself.
You are the application.
I mean, I would agree, go where the people are. Like, yeah, if there's a massive interest and people building on Ethereum, go there, sure. But appeal to people's emotions, you know, like, just, yeah, be interesting, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, I think kind of what makes us as a community not just open source peer-to-peer tech is crypto economics. And until we find a way to achieve that collaboration and that lack of competition through incredibly, I guess, futuristic ways of empowering and redistributing the weight associated with decision making in these protocols, which right now is basically buyable on any exchange, that to me is what will kind of push this wave of innovation with applications, because unless we're able to ensure that people have that power and have that control, you know, when we go to to traditional conferences, the big question is, well, what's the difference between these captured blockchains and Web 2 product X? And the answer is not much. But we can do better, and we will do better, but we have to remember that this is what we're working towards, is that collaboration piece, is that post-scarcity economic mindset where the world isn't just zero-sum and is a positive sum-based future that we can all work towards.
Yeah, and that comes from like as wide a distribution of like tokens and those kind of systems like as possible, right? So as little as possible like direct VC investment, which is so
I was going to say, how are you going to tell the VCs that?
Yeah, I don't think VCs are bad, right? Like capital exists somewhere and we cannot build things without capital. And so nothing I just said is meant to vilify any participant in our community. We need VCs, and we have some incredible people who support us, who help make the journey possible, just like anyone, like Lion when he was building Lodestar. I think what's important is to make sure that the end game is to make sure that those people understand that without the widest distribution possible, as the end game, their value capture is basically impossible, and we're just waiting for the French Revolution. But
I guess you can also be selective about which VCs, because I think there is quite a wide spread of philosophies at the different firms.
I think something that we're seeing more and more of now is like protocols raising, is specifically ones that are like have ambitions of being very decentralized, not taking direct investment anymore. This is like a relatively new thing, I guess, but leveraging, now that we have the interest-bearing coins like DAI and staked Ether, deposit those in a smart contract and take the interest, let the investors keep their principal, reward them with your new tokens by slowly emitting tokens to them. And that's a system that's totally open where anybody can participate, and it's not locked into just a few insider VCs. And I think in general, yeah, we could see like that causes wider distribution, which makes everybody happier. Even like exchange listing teams are much happier with that kind of system because there's not so many insiders that are going to sell on retail. And I think, yeah, moving in that direction makes a lot of sense. So I think the role that VC will play is changing in that way.
I think we have a lot of flexibility too, because projects have a timeline to them. So you can start off with a more owned model in capital ownership, and then start to allow the community to purchase out that ownership. And there's a lot of different methods and models for doing that.
All right, I think that's all the time we have. We are a bit behind schedule. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, all the panelists.